Welcome back everybody to the security stream for the GSE conference. If you don't know me already, my name's Jamie Pease. I'm the chair of the security working group. It gives me great pleasure to welcome back Al Surratt, who's by no means a stranger to GSE. He's dying to get over here so that we can have beers and do the conference in person, but I think we'll have to park that until next year and have a virtual drink this year. So Al is calling in from California. So welcome, Al. And this is session 1AE for the purpose of feedback. So at the end of the session, please do give feedback. Al's going to do his session in two parts. What will happen is about halfway through, when he switches over to the next part, the opportunity to answer questions and things and have a discussion. But as ever, please do pop your questions in the chat, any comments that you have throughout, and we'll do our best to respond to those during the session. But without further ado, Al, the stage is yours, and welcome back to GSE.
Well, Jamie, thanks again for having me. I really enjoy GSE, but I do really look forward to in-person meetings. I find them just so much more engaging, and the fact that we can share a beer is only a small part of that. So I'll get right into things here, and then eventually I'll take a breath, and we can chat over some of the early portion, and then we'll see what happens in the second half. Hi, I'm Al Surratt with Maintegrity. Thanks for joining us for our presentation, Banking Cyber Resiliency. We'll talk today about regulations and solutions for financial services companies. The session is 1AE, and we'll get started in a minute. Thank you. In addition to lots of great content, the GSE UK conference has a big heart. Please participate in their 2021 charity raffle, or if you have means, please contribute to one of the charities selected by GSE this year. Thanks for your support. Talking about IT security is a complicated task. Sometimes it is helpful just to know where the pieces fit. We'll start out by looking at the cybersecurity landscape on ZOS, but more specifically, we'll discuss the new cyber resiliency guidelines that apply to all financial services companies. But those guidelines overlap immensely with other compliance requirements like PCI, NIST, GDPR, and SOC. When we get to the section on interoperability of security tools, maybe I can provide some new ways of dealing with the clutter. And finally, I hope I can provide some concrete examples of how to drive down costs and save lots of effort. I've been around the IT business for about 40 years, mostly on the mainframe and enterprise computing side, starting out as systems program, then moving in management, but the last 25 years or so, building software solutions for operations. If you're interested in getting an overview of mainframe security and the landscape, you're probably in the right place. And if you want to stick around for the second half of this discussion, hopefully I'll be able to show you how to automate your response and compliance environment so that you can make things happen more quickly with a lot less effort. So with that, we'll get started. Cybersecurity has been around for over 30 years. It initially set out to identify and protect the mainframe from unauthorized access. That's where RACF, TSS, and ACF2 came from, along with firewalls. During that period, we also started with SMF, where every action on the mainframe is recorded. Later on, we added change control. Then, as the world expanded and open systems became available, SIEMs, or a single security console, became very important. And the last piece going into place recently was FIM processing that we'll get to in a minute. However, cyber resiliency came along and it became very important to get financial services companies back on the air very quickly after an attack. Then detection, response, and recovery became very important. So things like cyber vaults and ZBD from our suppliers Dell and IBM had value, as well as the traditional FDR DSS backups on virtual tape libraries, being the primary asset available for recovery. Also, FIM was extended with forensics and restore in order to integrate the entire process. Lastly, and just this year, DevOps became much more visible in the security context. And that was because of the SolarWinds problem earlier this year. Endeavor, ISPW, Changeman, and in some environments, Git are the standard products there. However, supply chain security becomes more and more important as we're proceeding forward. Over time, IT cybersecurity and resiliency has become highly regulated. Each new attack resulted in new regulations from very different organizations. Compliance with so many rules resulted in many additional audit and reporting steps that are expensive and time-consuming. Trying to comply with required significant time and energy, not to mention cost. Tools were invented to serve specific purposes, but they ended up creating silos of information that could not easily be shared. But it wasn't just technology that didn't talk. Every area seems to have their own specialists coordinating activities in a crisis situation when people don't speak the same language or use familiar tools becomes more and more difficult. Cloud services now are seemingly everywhere. Integrating traditional mainframe tools with the cloud will require a lot of work to do this seamlessly. And it'll have to utilize common interfaces that make it easier for new and existing staff to communicate. There are always new compliance requirements, but the newest cyber resiliency guidelines from the BIS IOSCO organization in Bern, Switzerland, comes directly from the top of the financial world. It applies to banking, insurance, securities, and other financial services companies, and was ratified in all countries by 2020. Enforcement comes through the SEC in the United States, the FCA in the UK, the OSC in Canada, and other securities regulators in other countries in the world. Aimed at protecting financial stability, it is mostly focused on detection and recovery, with the recommended time frame being full recovery of any financial entity of size within 2 hours. They recommend that you implement the best security controls. We'll get into those in a minute, but NIST and PCI figure very prominently in those types of systems. They also recommend a layered approach, particularly on legacy systems. A whitelist is required for most environments, creating an inventory of all the approved processes that can run in your IT environment. They also recommend validating backups regularly to prove that your primary asset in recovery has not been compromised. The ability to determine the scope of an attack quickly and the affected assets is also important. The largest fine currently invoked under these rules is Tesco Bank at £16.4 million. However, other actions that affect cyber resiliency will undoubtedly result in even greater fines. Another major compliance standard in the financial services area is the payment card industry data security standard. This applies to every computer processing debit and credit card information. Current version is 3.2.1, with version 4 expected towards the end of this year. Backed by MasterCard, Visa, Amex, and others, its intention is to harden security and then prove compliance. They recommend continuous monitoring and corroborating evidence that that monitoring is taking place on a regular basis. Then additional reporting requirements will produce conclusive proof that all of the 32 specific controls are in place and operating as planned. However, senior management must sign off that you fully comply. Part of every PCI audit will include an area called attestation, where a senior officer of the company will have to sign his name and be legally responsible. So your CIO, your CFO, your CEO sign something with legal weight, and it better be correct. From time to time, PCI also sends out urgent bulletins. One such bulletin highlighted an emerging threat. Multiple banks had been attacked with unlimited ATM withdrawals, emptying the machines of cash. They determined that fraud controls had been altered in the card management system and that changes to parameters and/or executables had taken place. This takes knowledge and coordination. It was most likely an inside job, was the assertion. Most ACM transactions are still captured on a mainframe, so it's highly likely that this was perpetrated by a mainframe insider. As a result, they recommended 724 integrity monitoring and a really strict separation of roles so that there could be no inside job. One of the most complete and widely accepted security standards is the USA-based NIST framework. Most countries in the world have accepted the standard and have reissued it themselves. It's a 5-step program that starts with identity and moves through to recovery. So it covers both cybersecurity and cyber resiliency. Implementing each of the steps is key to ensuring that overall security is maintained. Things like security continuous monitoring or forensics and analysis built into your processes become very important. And also the ability to ensure that your backups are available when required, and you have a continuous improvement program that continues to implement new controls as they come along. For further reference, you can look at these US government framework slides, and they'll give you a better understanding. In particular, NIST 853, now in Release 5, is an excellent list of security practices that would be recommended for any company. For financial services, another key compliance requirement is the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, or SOX for short. It applies to US companies and to US subsidiaries of foreign companies. There are strict internal controls, mostly for the avoidance of fraud. New rules for accountants, auditors, and corporate officers came into force in 2002, and they required stringent record keeping. Unfortunately, the proof that is required for this type of record keeping tends to be very cumbrous. It takes a lot of work and time. However, criminal penalties for violating these securities laws are very stringent as well. up to 25 years in prison. So that requires real compliance, and compliance requires real proof. All changes are authorized. That means everything from top to bottom in their financial reporting or anything affects financial reporting needs to be signed off by a senior officer of the company. Internal controls are in place to ensure that these responsibilities are discharged correctly. Separation of responsibilities so that no one person can make changes. And variances reported. That's really where the rub comes in. The variance reporting is every single thing that was changed needs to be proven to have been approved. And typically that means some sort of work to take every change from SMF and compare it to your change control records to ensure that that was an approved change. That's a tremendously boring manual effort. And the audit that goes along with it can also be a very long, painful, detailed process. The last compliance standard that I'll deal with is GDPR. It's more of an outcome-based compliance standard, which means it doesn't have specific controls itself. It applies to companies doing business anywhere in the EU. In particular, Article 32 and 43 require compliance with PCI, NIST, and other best practices in IT security. If found deficient, fines of up to 4% of global turnover can be assessed. Amazon was just assessed a mind-boggling €746 million fine. Fines year over year have increased by 125% and now exceed 1.3 billion as far as August of 2021. Companies affected are big names. You know many of them. However, this is still not enough to get widespread acceptance. Only 20% of US, UK, and EU companies are fully GDP compliant. And 30% actually have yet to start, which means if there was a breach, you would be found in default, and almost for certain, there would be a mind-boggling fine. Ignore these rules at your own peril. In summary, there are a lot of security compliance and resiliency guidelines. All of them require some level of reporting, and continuous monitoring is a typical component of every one. As an industry, IT must improve compliance as we go forward, but at the same time, we need to be able to drive administrative effort, audit costs, and reporting costs down. So by looking at a holistic approach for the IT security requirements might be the only way that we can do this at a reasonable cost.
Okay, Jamie, I don't know if we've got any questions that have come in from the field, but you know, perhaps there was some things in that area that were of interest to you. And before we get started on the next part of our presentation, you know, perhaps we could just have a little discussion of anything that came in from the field.
So we had a question, Al, from Les. Thanks for your question. It says, what regulatory bodies address technical debt?
Which regulations require the most technical depth?
No, which regulatory bodies address technical debt?
You know, there isn't a lot of discussion about technical debt in any of the regulations. And part of the reason for that is technical debt has a different kind of definition in most of the customers that we deal with. But I'd really like to reserve that question for just a little bit, Jamie, because I think when we get into some of the solutions, we're going to specifically talk about things that you can do to repay technical debt at the same time as you're dealing with these compliance rules. So, I mean, the last thing I want to do is suggest that we need more rules and more compliance standing by itself and more proof being developed by manual means. So when we talk about automation and the ability to actually deal with these things on an ongoing basis, done correctly, I think if there's a lot of technical debt repayment that takes place as a result of fixing some of the other things that are done manually. So my argument would be technical debt, for the most part, to date on mainframes, has been paid by systems programming, applications programming, folks that actually have to build these kind of reports and sort of self-check and self-report. Whereas if we just automated some of those activities and we took away that work from our trusted systems programming folks, A, we'd lower the effort level, and B, we would certainly have a much bigger opportunity to repay that technical debt in an organized manner. But I'll get to that in a minute. Just let me take a look here for a second, and I will get us started on our presentation.
How are we ever supposed to meet all these compliance requirements in a way that leads to better security, but at an affordable cost and a reasonable amount of effort? According to the SANS Institute, protection of data is best achieved with a combination of encryption, integrity protection, and data loss prevention. I'm going to explore that concept over the next few slides. But I think it's a very common belief that mainframes are unhackable. We're going to explore that a little on the conventional security side, and then maybe I'll be able to offer some solutions as to how we can address the problems above. Conventional mainframe security has typically depended on guarding the perimeter. Firewalls and access control programs like RACF, TSS, and ACF2 attempt to allow the good guys in, but keep the bad guys out. However, the bad guys get more resourceful and steal credentials. One interesting experience lately at a major bank is that a systems program was contacted by someone offering employment at nearly twice the salary. He was asked to fill out an application form. Of course, this was a spear phishing event, and having filled out the form, he actually got malware loaded onto his PC. Subsequent keystroke logging revealed his password and user ID. You can imagine what happened next. Even simpler now, criminals just go to the dark web and buy credentials, and there are plenty for sale. Another form of internal attack is formerly trustworthy staff that go rogue because of disgruntlement, gambling, or health problems. They already have access and know where the sensitive files are. Once inside, hackers now go after your backups. That compromises your ability to recover, and then they complete the attack. That's why Forrester says perimeter security has failed. One effective technique for augmenting your perimeter security would be to implement a file integrity monitoring product. That's a generic term for tools that use hashing to determine if the contents of datasets have been altered. This has been used for many years on Windows, Linux, and cloud environments. The objective is to verify that components in production match the trusted state. With file integrity monitoring, you initially take a snapshot at a trusted level. We call that a baseline. Simply hash codes associated with the file and member names. Baseline is then saved in the encrypted vault for further processing. Most of the hashing can be offloaded to the crypto cards on modern mainframes. Subsequent scans generate new hash codes. They are compared against the baseline versions in the vault, and if the hash codes match, then we know everything is correct, and we validate the success. Otherwise, something has changed, and we report the change immediately. In addition, it is relatively easy to implement because there is no user or application change required. Continuous monitoring and alerts can be an excellent complement for both perimeter security and file integrity monitoring. It can provide an early warning of impending attack. For instance, perhaps looking at the update or read activity for linear vSAN, the underlying data construct for most DB2 and IMS databases, could reveal suspicious activity. Snooping, browsing parm libs, proc libs, APF libs, and the like from TSO could also indicate an impending attack. You can create an alert based on decoy data sets. These are honeypots. They're actually something that looks like it's really important or named like it's really important, but really doesn't have anything of interest in it and wouldn't be used by production job. And you should be verifying your backups. Since hackers typically compromise backups before they attack, this is an excellent early warning sign. To take all this suspicious activity and remove the false positives, it's very useful to use the whitelists or baselines that were created in the FIM process to avoid those false positives. That way, when you get an alert, you know it's for real. Let's see how that data integrates with FIM processing. As we discussed, FIM creates a baseline of information from a trusted copy of the system. Subsequently, it goes away and runs more tests to see if anything has been compromised. It can look at your CICS environment, your ZOS environment, applications that you might have, or USS. Typically, an FIM system would look at the executables, JCL, parms, APF libs, anything that's really sensitive, and make sure that things haven't changed. Most of the time, you'll find that there are no changes. However, eventually, one day, you'll find something got changed. This is an indicator of a real problem. At that point, a good FIM system will issue an alert by email and by text that can be delivered directly to the response team. Integrated forensics can do even more. With one-click access to a GUI or 3270 environment, you can know immediately what's affected and the attack interval. Since the FIM tool knows when things were last correct, we know the interval between when they were correct and now is the time frame in which the attack took place. That way, we can go directly to SMF, fetch all the relevant records so you can tell who did it and the exact time. Then you could check to see if this change was approved or not by looking at your change control system, perhaps ServiceNow or Helix. If it's connected in a meaningful way to the cloud, then it doesn't matter where those services would be running. You could reach them through the cloud. And then eventually, you might want to be able to invoke a line-by-line compare. If you compare the baseline copy to the current copy, you can tell which line changed and whether it was just a comment code or whether it was a real line of code that looks suspicious. Now you know whether this was a real attack or just a false alarm. If it was a real attack, you might want to get started on your recovery. One of the advantages of having FIM information is that you know everything that got changed. Therefore, you know what has to be restored. In addition, any good tool would allow you to suspend the problematic user ID and quarantine all of the information in a safe place so that once the recovery has been accomplished, you can then go back later and understand the context of the attack fully. Then you probably want to go and verify your backups prior to doing a restore. If you have a restore assistant in some manner that can identify those components that need to be restored, it could build a JCL for you, and your recovery team would simply have to decide whether they want to kick off the restore or hold off until they are sure that a restore is required. And once it's finished, of course, you can verify the restore. In fact, even better, with integration to some of the new cyber tools for secure backup storage, that restore assist process could potentially retrieve a snapshot only a few minutes old to be the basis of your restore, ensuring that the minimum number of transactions has to be applied before you get back on the air. So you can probably see now how perimeter security, working with file integrity monitoring and continuous monitoring, can improve security and if linked to the recovery processes, improve resiliency as well. But how does that really make my life as a systems programmer any easier? Well, it can, but only if your tools can interoperate, and of course there are manual steps which you wish to automate. Here's an example of a SOX issue. Large multinational bank had a US subsidiary and needed to be SOX compliant. That required that any unauthorized change had to be reported. The process that they were using was to pull the thousands of SMF update records out every day and compare them to change control information in ServiceNow. Then they would further verify that the change that took place was legitimate. Every single part of that required a person to go from one tool environment and interface to the next and perform all those functions in a mind-numbingly boring way for years in memoriam. Here's the process that we suggested they look at. Any modern FIM system could track every change that occurred on production systems. Those could then be compared with a white list of production processes and jobs that were allowed to make updates. In the next step, a real-time query of ServiceNow change information could reveal any changes that were unauthorized. Using a simplified forensics interface, staff could further validate whether the changes appeared to be correct or not. If truly unauthorized, the exceptions could be placed on the SOX report and have it stored and emailed to appropriate staff. Finally, when it was time for the audit, the browser could again be invoked by the auditor to ensure that all processes were according to plan. It is expected that the reduction in effort will reach 90% within a couple of months. Another example might be what can be done for saving effort on the PCI side. Another good example was a large transportation company that used credit cards extensively. So, of course, regulated by PCI. PCI DSS section 10.5 and 11.5 requires FIM processing and weekly proof of regular processing. Their outsourcer had built a manually intensive compensating control on the mainframe. They were aware that version 4 of DSS was likely to tighten compensating controls, so they were more than a little interested in getting an automated solution in place. After testing mainframe FIM with automated reporting and delivery, it was estimated that the admin saving was more than one full-time position, and the reliability and auditability were also improved. Let's have a look at what they saw. For this transportation company, the PCI audit report is now created electronically. It is sent to all relevant staff every week and stored so that when audit time rolls around, they can prove that the audits were done as required every week. In addition to that, at audit time, the auditor can use a standard browser interface that's easy to understand if he wishes to explore more of the information available within FIM. In wrapping up, I hope this presentation has helped you see that you can improve security, resilience, and compliance while reducing effort and driving down cost. Improved protection with whitelists, backup log verification, and avoidance of false positives can be very important. Continuous monitoring can give you early warning of an attack. And realistically, who wants to have to recover from an attack when you could have prevented it in the first place? Faster incident response is possible through a continuous process with in-stream forensics. You can identify unauthorized changes with a very quick query of ServiceNow or BMC ITSM. Automated compliance with most of the major compliance standards is quite possible. It'll allow you to finish your next audit faster and get back to the real work that you want to do. Remember, mainframes are high-value targets. Defend them properly. Now, if you wouldn't mind, please submit your session feedback. Hopefully you found the information presented interesting, and it's been helpful in deciding what you need to do in terms of improved security and resiliency. If nothing else, and you now understand the landscape that we're working in, then I would say the session was successful. Thank you very much for your attendance. And let's not forget to become a member of GSE UK. The conferences are great, the working groups are great, and there are all kinds of free benefits. Sign up today.
So with that, I'll wrap things up and go back to you, Jamie. But this question that came up of technical debt, I hope that that in the second part of the presentation, we went directly to the heart of technical debt, because we're looking for a technical solution. We're looking for automated processes that replace antiquated manual processes that often are really problem prone and create as many issues as they resolve. So I think that was a really good question, because it talks right to, let's move ahead of the distributed world for once. Let's get our silos of information to be correlated, to produce the kinds of results you want by cross-referencing that information and building our reports automatically. That way, there's less effort involved. There's a tremendous amount of cost saving, especially in a a SOX or PCI context. But, you know, this is really the heart of how our systems management processes on the mainframe can in fact supersede the ones that have been implemented in the distributed world. And for the first time in a long time, we can be ahead of that, of the current situation in the distributed world. So when Gartner or anybody else comes and starts to talk to you about repaying technical debt, you can turn that conversation around and say, ah, yes, how are those guys in the distributed world going to start paying back their technical debt, which we've just created by having a much better technical solution. Anyway, that's enough of that, Jamie. If there are more questions, let's go on to them, but sure like the one that we got in from the field already.
Yeah, feel free to ask questions, folks, pop them in the chat. I will also unmute the lines. If you want to throw a question in, you can unmute yourself now. But while we're waiting, Al, so I've got a couple of questions for you. So you mentioned about SOX. I saw, yep. Is it true you have in Canada CSOX?
I'm sorry, run that by me again, Jamie.
So I noticed in your slides about the reference to SOX controls,
yep.
But you have also CSOX, don't you, in Canada? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and does that differ much from the main SOX? Just thinking about sort of customers, you know, or you know, mainframe sites that are in Canada or have presence operations in Canada. So,
and that's a big deal for Canadian companies, especially if they're cross-listed on some of the U.S. stock exchange or you know, London-based companies that would be listed in New York or something like that. They have to comply with this SOX regime just the same. So one of the interesting discussions was that I had was with a bank in Australia, and truthfully, I was shocked at the amount of manual effort that was involved. I mean, I had to end up telling that particular customer that if we fixed their SOX compliance problem, which was clearly in Australia a result of having a US subsidiary, we would probably save them more money in the first year than the entire project and every piece of technology they had to buy was created. So I said to them, well, this is the first time that I can really truthfully say that providing better compliance might actually save you money. So by fixing your compliance woes, you actually get paid. So it's kind of it was kind of an interesting discussion.
Second question I've got for you is around sort of this, you know, the solution that you've just described. I mean, is it a lot of effort to kind of get it up and, you know, get it up and running and operational? And
we think that it's, you know, any solution that you look at in this space, and there are lots of people that have parts of the answer. Not necessarily everybody has a complete answer to this area, but if it isn't dead simple to implement, and that means first and foremost, no user changes, no as few changes to you know, the reporting environment as you can make, so kind of cloning what you have on the manual side of things, but pulling that information out automatically. We think that that's really important. However, if it takes months to get started, it just doesn't make any sense. So we look at tools that have auto discovery so that they understand what should be on the whitelist. Then they can build you a whitelist in a couple of hours, in the first couple of hours of running. So those are the kinds of things that we think are necessary to make this successful, because we're kind of realistic operations guys. And if you're already overwhelmed with the amount of work you have to do, the last thing you really want to do is sort of stop all your daily activity and spend a bunch of time implementing a product. So no, We think it's possible to do automated implementation, and we think it should take hours, not days.
Okay. One other question I've got for you. Sorry, folks, I'm hogging questions here for Al, but if you've got any, do feel free to chip in. But like, I think a lot of people on the call, like sort of on the sort of ground, sort of running the sort of day-to-day operations, and some people I think really struggle to sort of convince management, you know, that they need to act to do things. I mean, what would be the sort of advice you would give to get management buy-in? You know, how would you start there? I suppose, you know, you can say to a manager, oh, you know, we've got these problems, we're not going to comply, blah, blah, blah. There's this security issue here. But I think people feel that management aren't listening. What would your advice be?
This is a really good one to go after. So I mean, key hot buttons. Some of these are a little bit incendiary, where you need to say something a bit dramatic in terms of getting a little bit of senior management attention. But ransomware is a word that has impact in the C-suite. Another thing is cybersecurity. You know, how do we get better cybersecurity? Almost every time anybody talks about cybersecurity, it costs money. You know, you need products, you need to buy something. Well, this is a particular case where I believe not only you can say, let's improve our cybersecurity, and at the same time, if we get after some of the manual processes that are that we still do on the compliance side, if we can eliminate some of those processes, we can save money in the meantime. So for once, I can get improved cybersecurity, and it pays me to do so. And you know, those are the kinds of things that resonate in my mind with senior management. So, I mean, you have to be prepared to take the bit in your teeth a little bit. You have to be well researched. I would urge you to go to the web, look at the tools that are available in the mainframe space, and see how that fits into your organization. But these days, you know, I don't know what you're hearing, Jamie. You're as much of an expert in this area or more than I am. You know, we hear about ServiceNow everywhere. So, you know, when we say look at tools that have an automated ServiceNow interface, this is another thing that resonates with management, because it means we can do things automatically instead of having to do all these things manually. And the perception, I believe, of putting tools like ServiceNow into production environment is that we're going to save effort. But in those environments, once you put that effort in, you know, you get your change control all nicely centralized there and reporting through that environment. Now it's a bit of a issue how we get that out in a meaningful context and deliver that information to the rest of the organization. So if we can cut audit costs and you can cut compliance costs, yes, while you're supporting the ServiceNow implementation, I think management will listen. So those are my key points. Jamie, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, you know me, I'm a bit more historically, when I've told this story many times, I said it earlier in the week, and I wrote a paper for it for GSE actually, that I have for a number of years suffered this, you know, issue of trying to convince management, no matter how many metrics and things you put, or the language that the right language you try and use with managers or senior managers to act. I've often felt that it's just on deaf ears, you know, when it's, oh yeah, we've got other priorities, it's these programs running, you know, and I've kind of just sort of lost patience, and I've always sort of waited for the next audit to come along and flag my concerns then, because I know that they will listen, because they're eager to, you know, get things into their reports. I was always taught when I did some internal audit work, you need to find at least one failing.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
It's always key. I mean, at the end of the day, I've said, you know, many times that auditors are there to sort of help improve situations. So if that fails, where I can't convince senior management to do something, you know, it's the use the audit route, no matter how controversial it is. I think, as I was saying earlier in the week, we're almost, when we hear the auditors are coming up, given gagging orders to not say anything, but I think that's wrong, and that they're a good vehicle to get, you know, your concerns on the agenda, and then management typically will act because they have to do something about those findings. But yeah, I think it's another thing as well. We struggle as sort of technical people sometimes using just the sort of the right language, how to articulate things. And you're right what you say about sort of cost savings, you know, reduction in risk, but it's just putting it in a, you know, in a way that it's a wake-up call type discussion.
Yeah, I'd call that a business context, Jamie. But you know, to be honest with you, your comments are super practical. We used to do the same thing. We'd try and highlight a problem for the auditors that was dead easy for us to fix, and then we'd get that one checked off the list. So I think those are important things to look at. And as SysProgs, I really don't want to see the vanishing number of SysProgs even more overworked. So I'd like to make sure that when people are suggesting things to management, they do generate a financial return, but they also make the life of the systems programmer a little easier, and we get rid of some of the drudgery and the redundancy. So anyway, I'll leave it there, Jamie. I think we're probably coming up to the next presentation, or the evening, or the get together at the pub.
Yes. So thank you so much, Al, for coming back to us and for delivering your sessions. There's really some food for thought there. So folks, this is session 1AR, so for the purpose of feedback. So please, I keep saying this, remember, feedback equals CPE points if you need them, entering to prize draw, and of course it's important for Al and other presenters as well who you give feedback to, as well as GSE. So if you could just take the time to do that in any sessions that you haven't recorded your feedback for, please do that. We are taking a day off tomorrow because there's no conference tomorrow. So this is the last session. All the streams finish at 6 o'clock UK time. But we will be back on Monday, the 8th of November, for the week 2 of the conference. And that starts at 2 o'clock UK time, where Mark Wilson will do a conference opening for week 2. And there'll be a keynote. And then the security stream resumes on Tuesday, the 9th of November at 9 AM UK time, as well as the other streams. And then we run from right through till Thursday of next week. So we've got a lot of security sessions, great security sessions to get through. So hopefully you can join us for those. But yeah, thanks for sticking with us. I hope you've enjoyed the first few days of the conference. I've really enjoyed it, and enjoy the weekend. Have a drink tonight, and we will see you next Monday. And thanks, Al, once again.
Thanks ever so much, Jamie. Always a pleasure to work with you.
Thank you. Take care.